A quiet girl stands nervously in front of her high school class, her voice barely above a whisper as she attempts to explain her unusual absence from the homecoming dance. The teacher interrupts with visible irritation, demanding to know why she missed the mandatory school event. When she mentions her weekend competition, he scoffs loudly. Shooting competitions? Please. You can barely lift your backpack, let alone handle a rifle accurately. The class erupts in laughter. Just as tears threaten to spill, the principal's voice crackles over the intercom with an unexpected announcement. From which corner of the world are you following this incredible story today? If moments where quiet strength silences doubt inspire you, consider subscribing for more stories where true skill speaks louder than assumptions. Jefferson High School stood like a red brick fortress against the autumn sky in rural Montana, its traditional architecture reflecting decades of educating farm kids, ranch children, and the occasional student destined for bigger things. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot where pickup trucks outnumbered sedans 3-1, and gun racks in rear windows were as common as honor student bumper stickers. In classroom 204, Mrs. Henderson's third-period American history class buzzed with the typical energy of 17-year-olds discussing weekend plans and upcoming events. The room smelled of old textbooks and industrial disinfectant, its walls decorated with faded posters of presidents and historical timelines that had seen better decades. At her usual desk in the back corner, 16-year-old Riley Thompson sat with her characteristic stillness, her thin frame almost disappearing into the oversized flannel shirt that had belonged to her grandfather. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes held a depth that seemed unusual for her age, the kind of quiet intensity that came from spending long hours in solitude, practicing patience and precision. Riley's desk was notably empty of the typical teenage accessories. No decorative pens, no photos of friends, no smartphone prominently displayed. Instead, she kept a small notebook filled with calculations and diagrams that most of her classmates would have found incomprehensible. Windage adjustments, elevation corrections, and ballistic coefficients written in her precise handwriting. Mrs. Janet Henderson commanded the front of the classroom with the authority of someone who had been teaching for 28 years. Her graying hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her reading glasses hung from a chain around her neck like a badge of pedagogical authority. She had little patience for what she considered teenage excuses, and even less tolerance for students who didn't participate in school spirit activities. "All right, settle down," Mrs. Henderson called, tapping her ruler against her desk for attention. "Before we begin today's lesson on the Industrial Revolution, I need to address some disciplinary matters from last weekend's homecoming dance." She consulted a clipboard with obvious disapproval. Several students were absent from what was designated as a mandatory school function. "I'll be speaking with each of you individually about your unauthorized absences." Riley's stomach tightened. She had known this moment would come, but dreading it hadn't made it any less uncomfortable. Her fingers unconsciously traced the edge of her notebook, where she had sketched wind direction indicators and range estimations during previous classes. "Riley Thompson," Mrs. Henderson's voice cut across the room like a blade. "Please explain to the class why you felt homecoming was optional rather than mandatory." Riley stood slowly, her height, or lack thereof, becoming apparent as she rose barely above her seated classmates. At 5 feet 2 inches and maybe 110 pounds soaking wet, she looked like a strong wind might knock her over. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was quiet but steady. "I had a competition to attend, Mrs. Henderson. I submitted the required absence form 3 weeks in advance." Mrs. Henderson's eyebrows rose theatrically. "A competition? What kind of competition could possibly be more important than supporting your school and your classmates?" The classroom had fallen silent, sensing the building confrontation. Riley's classmates turned in their seats to watch, some with curiosity, others with the barely concealed anticipation of social drama that defined high school hierarchies. "A shooting competition, ma'am," Riley replied, her voice growing even quieter under the scrutiny. The silence that followed was broken by barely suppressed snickers from several students. Brad Morrison, the quarterback who had been dating the homecoming queen, couldn't contain himself. "Shooting competition?" He laughed loudly. "What did you do, Riley? Compete in the water gun division?" This triggered more laughter throughout the classroom. Sarah Wells, One of the popular girls who had been on the homecoming court added her voice to the mockery. I bet she won participation ribbons for showing up. Mrs. Henderson raised her hand for quiet, but her expression showed she shared the student's skepticism. Riley, I find it difficult to believe that you, of all students, would be involved in any serious shooting sport. You can barely carry your textbooks without struggling. It's true, ma'am, Riley insisted, her cheeks flushing but her voice remaining steady. I compete in precision rifle competitions through the National Rifle Association Junior Program. This statement caused another wave of laughter. Mrs. Henderson removed her glasses and cleaned them with exaggerated patience, a gesture that clearly communicated her growing irritation. Young lady, she said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she reserved for what she considered ridiculous student excuses, I've been teaching for nearly 3 decades. I've seen every creative excuse students can invent to avoid school obligations. She replaced her glasses and fixed Riley with a stare that had intimidated countless students over the years. The idea that you, someone who asks for help opening pickle jars in the cafeteria, could handle a high-powered rifle accurately enough to compete is simply absurd. The laughter that followed was louder now, emboldened by the teacher's obvious disbelief. Riley's face was burning with embarrassment, but something deeper flickered in her green eyes. Not shame, but a quiet determination that her classmates were too busy laughing to notice. Mrs. Henderson, Riley said, her voice still quiet but carrying a new edge. I understand why it's hard to believe, but I've been training since I was 8 years old. My grandfather taught me, and I've been competing nationally for 3 years. Nationally, Mrs. Henderson repeated, her voice dripping with theatrical disbelief. Riley, let's return to reality, shall we? You missed a mandatory school function, and you're compounding that mistake by telling increasingly elaborate stories to justify it. Brad Morrison leaned back in his chair, grinning at his friends. Come on, teach. Let her tell us about all the trophies she's won. This is better than Netflix. That's enough, Mrs. Henderson said, but her tone suggested she was more annoyed by the disruption than concerned about Riley's feelings. Riley, I'm giving you detention for missing homecoming, and an additional detention for wasting class time with these fantasies. Riley's hands clenched into fists at her sides. They're not fantasies, Mrs. Henderson. I placed 3rd in the National Junior Precision Rifle Championship last month. I can show you the 3rd place in what? Mrs. Henderson interrupted. Riley, the only thing you've ever placed 3rd in was that science fair project about plant growth, and even then I suspected your parents did most of the work. The classroom erupted in laughter again. Riley felt tears threatening, but her voice remained steady. I can prove it, ma'am. If you'll just let me, prove it how? Mrs. Henderson demanded. Are you going to magically produce a rifle and demonstrate your supposed skills right here in my classroom? The sarcasm in her voice was thick enough to cut with a knife. Several students were laughing so hard they were wiping tears from their eyes. Riley straightened her shoulders, and for a moment, something shifted in her demeanor. The quiet, almost invisible girl seemed to gain presence, her voice carrying a new authority that cut through the laughter. If that's what it takes, yes, ma'am. The classroom fell silent at the unexpected confidence in her voice. Mrs. Henderson blinked in surprise, clearly not having expected that response. Excuse me. If you want proof, I'll provide it, Riley said, her voice no longer whisper quiet but calm and certain. There's a shooting range 15 minutes from here. I can demonstrate my abilities this afternoon after school. Mrs. Henderson's mouth opened and closed several times before she found her voice. Young lady, this conversation has gone far enough. You will report to detention, and we will hear no more of these ridiculous claims. Just as Riley was about to respond, the intercom crackled to life with the distinctive sound of the school's PA system. Principal Matthews' voice filled the classroom, but instead of the usual morning announcements, his tone carried genuine excitement. Attention students and faculty. I have just received some extraordinary news that I wanted to share with our entire school community. Mrs. Henderson frowned at the interruption, clearly irritated by anything that disrupted her classroom authority. One of our own students, Junior Riley Thompson, has achieved something remarkable that brings great honor to Jefferson High School. Riley's eyes widened in surprise. She had no idea how Principal Matthews had learned about her recent competition results. Riley has been selected to represent Montana in the National Youth Shooting Sports Championships. And just last weekend, she achieved a perfect score at the regional qualifying event, something that has never been accomplished by anyone under the age of 21 in the history of the competition. The classroom was dead silent now, every eye fixed on Riley, who stood frozen by her desk. Principal Matthews continued, his pride evident in his voice. Riley's achievement is even more remarkable because she accomplished this perfect score under extremely challenging conditions, including variable wind conditions and extended range targets that would challenge professional marksmen. Mrs. Henderson's face had gone pale, her earlier confidence evaporating as the reality of the situation began to sink in. I'm pleased to announce that Riley has been invited to demonstrate her skills at today's faculty meeting, where she will be presenting the techniques and mental discipline required for precision shooting. Additionally, she has graciously agreed to represent our school at the upcoming state championship. The intercom went quiet, leaving the classroom in absolute silence. Riley remained standing, her expression carefully neutral, but there was no mistaking the quiet vindication in her eyes. Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat, her voice uncertain for the first time that day. Riley, perhaps I was too hasty in my assessment. Riley nodded once, her voice returning to its earlier quiet tone. Ma'am, would you still like me to provide that demonstration? Before Mrs. Henderson could answer, Brad Morrison, the same student who had been laughing loudest just minutes before, raised his hand tentatively. Riley, he said, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine curiosity. Is it true? Did you really get a perfect score? Riley looked at him for a long moment before answering. Perfect score doesn't tell the whole story, Brad. In precision rifle shooting, it's not just about hitting the target. It's about consistency, about hitting the exact same point multiple times under varying conditions. She paused, her voice gaining strength as she spoke about something she clearly understood better than anyone else in the room. Last weekend, I fired 25 shots at a target 600 yards away. Every shot hit within a 2-inch circle, and my final 5 shots all went through the same hole. The silence in the classroom was profound. Even Mrs. Henderson seemed unable to process what she was hearing. Sarah Wells, who had been part of the earlier mockery, raised her hand hesitantly. Riley, how is that even possible? I mean 600 yards. That's like really far, right? Riley smiled slightly, the first genuine smile she had shown that day. 600 yards is considered intermediate range for precision shooting. The targets I use for practice are usually at 800 to 1,000 yards. She moved to the chalkboard, picking up a piece of chalk with hands that, despite their apparent delicacy, moved with absolute confidence. At 600 yards, a bullet drops approximately 42 inches due to gravity, assuming standard atmospheric conditions. But you also have to account for wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, and even the rotation of the Earth. As she spoke, Riley began sketching on the blackboard, trajectory curves, wind vector diagrams, and mathematical calculations that demonstrated a level of technical knowledge that astounded her classmates. Every shot requires dozens of calculations performed in seconds, followed by physical execution that demands absolute stillness and breath control. A muscle tremor of 1 millimeter at the rifle translates to a miss of several inches at long range. Mrs. Henderson watched in fascination as this quiet girl she had dismissed transformed into someone demonstrating expertise that few adults could match. Riley, Mrs. Henderson said quietly, how long have you been studying these calculations? Since I was 8, ma'am. My grandfather was a Marine sniper in Vietnam. He taught me that precision shooting is more mental than physical. You have to understand physics, mathematics, weather, and most importantly, yourself. She set down the chalk and faced the class, no longer the invisible girl in the back row, but someone commanding respectful attention through demonstrated knowledge. The hardest part isn't the shooting, it's the patience. Sometimes you wait hours for the perfect conditions, the perfect moment when everything aligns, wind, light, your breathing, your heartbeat. Brad Morrison leaned forward in his seat. Riley, when you say your grandfather taught you, you mean he was a real sniper? Like, in actual combat. Riley's expression grew more serious. He served 2 tours in Vietnam with the 3rd Marine Division. He doesn't talk about the combat much, but he taught me that precision shooting is a discipline that requires respect for the weapon, for the skill, and for the responsibility that comes with both. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, but nobody moved. The students sat transfixed, seeing their classmate in an entirely new light. Mrs. Henderson stood slowly, her earlier authority shaken by the realization of how wrong she had been. Riley, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions based on appearances and preconceptions that were clearly unfounded. Riley nodded graciously. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I understand why it seemed unbelievable. No, Mrs. Henderson said firmly. There's no excuse for dismissing a student's achievements without investigation. I let my biases override my responsibility as an educator. As students began gathering their books, Sarah Wells approached Riley's desk hesitantly. Riley, I'm really sorry about laughing earlier. I had no idea. I mean, what you do sounds incredible. It's okay, Sarah, Riley replied simply. Most people don't understand precision shooting. It's not something you see in movies or on TV very often. Brad Morrison joined the growing group around Riley's desk. Hey, would you maybe show some of us how it works sometime? I mean, if you don't mind? Riley considered this for a moment. The range I train at offers beginner classes. If you're genuinely interested, I could introduce you to the basics. But it's not a casual sport. It requires dedication and respect for safety protocols. We'd be interested, several students said almost simultaneously. As the classroom emptied, Mrs. Henderson approached Riley's desk. Riley, I want you to know that I'm going to use this experience as a teaching moment for myself and for other faculty members. We educators sometimes make the mistake of thinking we know our students based on limited observations. Riley shouldered her backpack, the same one Mrs. Henderson had suggested she could barely lift, with easy confidence. Mrs. Henderson, everyone makes assumptions. The difference is what you do when you learn you're wrong. That afternoon, word had spread throughout Jefferson High School about Riley Thompson and her unexpected expertise. By the time school ended, a small crowd had gathered to witness the demonstration that Principal Matthews had arranged. The Clearwater shooting range sat on 40 acres of rolling Montana prairie, its outdoor rifle ranges extending from 100 to 1,000 yards. The facility was operated by Tom Hendricks, a retired Army Ranger who had known Riley's grandfather during their service years. Riley arrived at the range in her grandfather's old pickup truck, a faded blue Ford that looked like it had seen decades of ranch work but ran with mechanical reliability. She wore the same flannel shirt from that morning, but she had added a shooting jacket covered with patches from various competitions and a cap that had seen better years. Mrs. Henderson and Principal Matthews were already there, along with approximately 30 students and several other teachers who had heard about the day's developments. Even some parents had arrived, drawn by the unusual story spreading through the small community. Tom Hendricks greeted Riley with the respect of someone who knew her capabilities. Afternoon, Riley. I heard you stirred up some excitement at school today. Not intentionally, Mr. Hendricks, Riley replied with a slight smile. Mrs. Henderson wanted proof of my shooting abilities. I thought a demonstration might be more effective than just showing certificates. Mrs. Henderson overheard this and approached them. Riley, I want to apologize again for my skepticism this morning. I realize now that I let my preconceptions cloud my judgment. Apology accepted, ma'am, Riley said graciously. Would you like to observe the demonstration from the spotting scope? You'll be able to see the target more clearly. Riley led the group to the 600-yard firing line, where she began setting up her equipment with practiced efficiency. Her rifle, a custom-built precision instrument that had been her grandfather's final gift to her, looked almost too large for her small frame. But her movements as she assembled and adjusted the weapon showed years of familiarity and training. This is a Remington 700 action with a custom barrel, Riley explained to the watching crowd. It's chambered in .308 Winchester, which is a standard caliber for precision shooting. The scope is a Leupold Mark IV with tactical adjustments for windage and elevation. She began her pre-shooting routine, checking wind flags, consulting a ballistics chart, and making precise adjustments to her scope. Her movements were economical and confident, each action serving a specific purpose in preparing for accurate shots. Brad Morrison, who had driven out to witness the demonstration, watched in fascination. Riley, how do you know what adjustments to make? Riley glanced up from her calculations. The wind flags show a consistent 8-mile-per-hour crosswind from the left. At 600 yards with this load, that requires 3 clicks of right windage to compensate. The temperature is 62 degrees, which is close to the standard conditions my rifle is zeroed for, so no elevation adjustment is needed. She pointed to a target frame 600 yards downrange, so distant that it was barely visible to the naked eye. I'm going to fire 5 shots at the center of that target. From this distance, the bullseye appears to be about the size of a pinhead through the scope. Mrs. Henderson peered through the spotting scope that Tom Hendricks had set up for observers. I can barely make out the target, let alone the center ring. Riley settled into her shooting position with fluid precision. Her small frame seemed to mold itself around the rifle, creating a stable platform that eliminated any unnecessary movement. Her breathing became controlled and rhythmic, each exhale timed with her preparation for the shot. The first shot rang out, the sound echoing across the prairie. Riley remained motionless for several seconds after firing, her eyes still focused through the scope, assessing the result. Center X-ring, Tom Hendricks announced after checking the target through a high-powered spotting scope. Perfect 10. The watching crowd murmured in appreciation, but Riley was already preparing for her second shot. Her routine was identical, the same breathing pattern, the same careful alignment, the same smooth trigger press. Shot 2. Another perfect center hit. Shot 3. Same result. By the fourth shot, the crowd had fallen completely silent, watching this slight girl demonstrate precision that defied their understanding of what was possible. Mrs. Henderson remained at the spotting scope, her expression showing growing amazement with each perfect shot. The fifth and final shot echoed across the range. Riley remained in position for a long moment, then finally raised her head and safed her rifle. Tom Hendricks studied the target through his spotting scope for several seconds before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley has just fired 5 shots into a group that measures less than 1 inch at 600 yards. All 5 shots are inside the X-ring, and the last 3 shots appear to have gone through the same hole. The silence that followed was profound. These people had witnessed something that challenged their assumptions. About what was possible, about who could achieve such precision, and about the quiet girl they thought they knew. Mrs. Henderson stepped away from the spotting scope, her face showing a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Riley, I don't have words for what I just witnessed. Riley stood up from her shooting position, her demeanor returning to its characteristic quiet confidence. Thank you, ma'am. That's fairly typical for my training sessions. Brad Morrison found his voice first. Riley, that was incredible. I mean, how do you make it look so easy? Riley smiled as she began cleaning her rifle with the same meticulous attention she had shown in firing it. It's not easy, Brad. It's the result of thousands of hours of practice, study, and mental discipline. Every shot requires complete focus and execution of dozens of precise movements. Sarah Wells approached with obvious respect. Riley, I had no idea. I mean, none of us did. Why didn't you ever talk about this before? Riley considered this question carefully. People usually don't believe it until they see it. And precision shooting isn't something most teenagers can relate to. It requires patience, discipline, and dedication that doesn't fit with typical high school interests. Principal Matthews, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. Riley, I want to make sure the entire school community understands and appreciates your achievement. Would you be willing to give a presentation to the student body about your sport and your training? If you think it would be helpful, sir, Riley replied simply. Mrs. Henderson approached Riley one final time as the group prepared to leave. Riley, I want you to know that today has been a learning experience for me as much as for anyone else. I made judgments based on appearances and assumptions, and I was completely wrong. She paused, her voice carrying genuine emotion. You've taught me something important about looking deeper, about recognizing that students can possess expertise and achievements that aren't immediately obvious. Thank you for that lesson. Riley nodded with quiet grace. Mrs. Henderson, we all make assumptions. The important thing is being willing to change our minds when we learn new information. As the group dispersed, Tom Hendricks helped Riley pack her equipment. Your grandfather would be proud, Riley. Not just of your shooting, but of how you handled yourself today. Thank you, Mr. Hendricks. He always said that precision shooting teaches you more about yourself than about marksmanship. He was right about that. And he was right about you having the temperament for this sport. Not everyone can handle the mental pressure of precision shooting, especially not with an audience watching. Riley secured her rifle case in the truck bed. The audience actually made it easier in some ways. When people expect you to fail, there's no pressure to be perfect. You just focus on executing what you've trained to do. 2 weeks later, Riley's story had spread far beyond Jefferson High School. Local newspapers picked up the story of the quiet girl who had demonstrated world-class precision shooting skills, and shooting sports organizations began reaching out with scholarship opportunities. But the most significant change was in the school itself. Riley's classmates no longer saw her as the invisible girl in the back row, but as someone with exceptional skills and quiet confidence. More importantly, several teachers had used the incident as a catalyst for examining their own assumptions about student capabilities. Mrs. Henderson incorporated Riley's story into her teaching as an example of how appearances can be deceiving and how individual achievement often comes in unexpected forms. She also began making more effort to learn about her students' interests and activities outside of school. Riley continued her training and competition schedule, but she also began working with younger shooters at the range, teaching basic marksmanship and safety. Her patience and quiet confidence made her an effective instructor, and she found satisfaction in passing on the discipline her grandfather had taught her. The shooting club she helped establish at Jefferson High School grew to include 12 members, ranging from complete beginners to students with hunting experience who wanted to improve their precision skills. Riley served as the club's technical advisor and safety officer, roles that required her to step further out of her comfort zone, but that helped her develop leadership skills she hadn't known she possessed. During the state championship competition, Riley not only won her division, but set a new state record for junior precision rifle shooting. Mrs. Henderson attended the competition, joining Riley's grandfather and several classmates in cheering her success. At the awards ceremony, when asked about her achievement, Riley's response was characteristically humble. Precision shooting teaches you that success comes from consistent execution of fundamentals, patience to wait for the right conditions, and the mental discipline to perform under pressure. These are lessons that apply to much more than marksmanship. The reporter conducting the interview asked about the incident at school that had brought her abilities to public attention. Riley smiled slightly before answering. Sometimes people need proof before they can believe in possibilities they haven't seen before. I don't blame anyone for being skeptical. What I do isn't common, especially for someone my age and size. But I'm grateful that my teachers and classmates were willing to change their perspectives when presented with evidence. Mrs. Henderson, watching from the audience, felt a mixture of pride and humility. She had learned as much from Riley as any student had learned from her in 28 years of teaching. Have you ever encountered someone whose quiet competence was hidden beneath an unremarkable exterior? Sometimes the most remarkable skills belong to the most unassuming people, those who have developed extraordinary abilities through patience, discipline, and dedication, often in solitude, often without recognition, until one moment when their expertise becomes undeniably visible to the world.